the West, in the United States, one-party state effectively with its two factions, the Democrats and the Republicans, and the whole of the European Union, with some very small, bright exceptions like Ireland, for instance, and maybe Spain, are totally complicit in the genocide. That's the first lesson. There are no excuses now. In that sense, Israel is simply trying to replicate in the land of Palestine that which the British, the Germans, the Dutch, the French did in their empire. So it's not a great surprise, really, that European regimes and American regimes support Israel. Israel is simply trying to copy them. One would have thought, and this is a great disappointment of a European like me, that we Europeans, at least, managed to be self-critical, sometime in the 1960s and 1970s with decolonization.
Imagine if Stasi or the KGB had access to the algorithms of Meta, Facebook, Google. I mean, my good, these people, there are some people who still survive, like Putin, for instance, from the old KGB. They must be kicking themselves that they had to deploy such crude measures for social control, killing people and putting them in the gulag. Now, as you put, now people volunteer their serfdom. People volunteer their serfdom now.
Well, you know that if you counter the anti-Chinese propaganda, if you come out in the media and say, come on, folks, enough of this anti-Chinese propaganda, you won't get this job. You'll be out of a job once you're no longer a minister. Maybe you will lose your ministership or your ministry. I've noticed in the last 2 years the intensification of anti-Chinese propaganda in our media. Just ludicrous stories. Stories that you don't need to know what's going on, just to read them or listen to them, to know that they have come out of a production line of propaganda. And that propaganda is simply functional to Washington's intensification of the new Cold War against China. So I think China has a much better image amongst people generally than amongst governments, which actually don't even believe their propaganda, but they have to toe the line. Allow me to put it very bluntly. If you're a politician who wants a good job for yourself, right? Let's say you're the minister of something in Europe, in Italy, in Greece, right? And you know that your career as a minister is not going to last more than 5, 6, 7, at most 10 years. And you are a career politician, and then you want to move up. You want to go to Brussels to be given a cushy job, some kind of directorate of the European Union, some ambassadorship of the European Union, maybe become a commissioner in the European Union, maybe get a job in Luxembourg at the European Investment Bank. Well, you know that if you counter the anti-Chinese propaganda, if you come out in the media and say, come on, folks, enough of this anti-Chinese propaganda, you won't get this job. You'll be out of a job once you're no longer a minister. Maybe you will lose your ministership or your ministry, right? So people here in China must understand that it's not so much that propaganda works at convincing people that China is the big bad wolf. It doesn't work that way. You simply need to know that if you speak out against the propaganda, even if you don't believe the propaganda, your career is going to be jeopardized. There's a fundamental difference between what people think and what governments do. Ordinary people, I think across Europe, have a high regard for the Chinese people. They can see clearly that the Chinese people, whatever problems China may have, pulled themselves up from the bootstraps in the last 30 years, went from a situation where China was a third world country, a very impoverished country, to a country that is now at the forefront of technology, of social cohesion. They have a high regard for China. Maybe they're a bit envious because Europe is going in the other opposite direction. So this is where we've come to. These days, propaganda doesn't even need to convince people. It just needs to scare them off acting on what they know. So if you talk to, the average Greek or to the average Italian, they know that the diminution in the cooperation with China, you saw what happened in Italy. A neo-fascist prime minister was elected, Giorgia Meloni. In order for her to build a strong relationship with Brussels, she had to build a strong relationship with the United States, and to signal to the United States that she wants a good relationship with them, she ditched the Belt and Road agreement between Italy and China. That was a very cynical political move that was negative. It was a negative development, a bad development for Italy.
What it has done is it has made it abundantly clear that the West, in the United States, one-party state, effectively, with its two factions, the Democrats and the Republicans, and the whole of the European Union, with some very small, bright exceptions like Ireland, for instance, and maybe Spain, are totally complicit in the genocide. That's the first lesson. There are no excuses now, after 1 year of this unrelenting genocide, for the West to be arming and backing Israel in this campaign of terror, horror, death and destruction in Gaza, in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, and now South Lebanon. That's the first lesson. The second lesson is that it is not Netanyahu. You can see that even after 1 long year of this orchestrated misanthropism, Netanyahu manages to have total control of the Knesset, of the parliament in Israel. So it's not just, a Likud coalition with the fascist parties of the settlers. It's the whole of the Knesset. Not the whole, but the crushing majority of the Knesset. Last July, the International Court of Justice ruled, as it should, and it has done many times in the past, that the occupied territories are illegally occupied and that Israel should evacuate them, must evacuate them. This is what international law decrees. And 5 days later, the Knesset voted 65 to 9, that this is the land of Israel. In other words, defying international law and stating that there will never be a Palestinian state, against even what Joe Biden says. So the United States, the West, the crushing majority of the political spectrum in Israel are complicit in a genocide which knows no bounds. They've killed 200,000 people in Palestine, if you include the people who succumbed to their wounds after being bombed, and not just the 40,000 who died instantly, but 200,000 have died as a result of the bombings and the malnutrition and the lack of water and the lack of medicine. And it's not clear to me, I don't know whether you agree or not, but that even if that number was not 200,000, but it was, 2 million, the West would remain apathetic. The West would remain complicit, and so would the Knesset. So we are talking about a fully fledged genocide with the support of the powers that be in Europe, in the United States, and in Israel. And the third lesson is that the spirit of resistance that the Palestinians have done so much and they have sacrificed so much to keep alive has become a bellwether for humanity's capacity to retain a connection with its basic moral principles. So today, it really doesn't matter what you know about the specificities of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. If you live in South Africa, if you live in Namibia, if you live in Bangladesh, if you live in wherever you live, you know that you are on the good side, not the right side, but the good side of history, if you remain solidaristic to Palestine. Because in the end, unless the Palestinians are free, none of us are free.
We had a quadrupling of suicides as a result of the loss of hope. You see, it's not poverty, because Greeks have been poor for eons. Poverty has been part and parcel of the Greek condition. When I was growing up, Greece was poorer than it was in 2012, 2013. It's the substantial and very fast loss of means to reproduce one's life that drives people to mental destruction. The reason why I went into that government was because the young prime minister that had led the party, Alexis Tsipras, had inspired me, as well as millions of people out there. I remember walking to his prime ministerial office after our swearing ceremony, and we looked into one another's eyes, we hugged, and we said, "Oh shit, what are we doing now?" Because we were in command of the most bankrupt state probably in the world. But in the weeks that followed, he came to an agreement with our foes, with the foes of our people, with the creditors, with the financiers, with Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany. It's clear that he came to an agreement. I was a problem. I was in his way because he wanted to surrender. And I had, old-time communists saying to me, I've been through the pain of the split of the Communist Party, through the pain of the civil war, through the pain. I can't have another civil war. So lots of people stayed with that government, giving them the benefit of the doubt, knowing that they were doing the wrong thing, because emotionally they could not handle it. And the last thing I want to say is this. Then Tsipras, after he surrendered and signed all the most awful pieces of legislation that were dictated, they were sent to him from Brussels and Berlin and Frankfurt by email. And Gabor, I don't know whether you can understand what it felt like to be in Parliament, because I was a member of Parliament. I didn't resign from that, obviously. And we were getting pieces of legislation that were 1,000 pages long. And it was clear that they were translated by Google Translate, because they were written in German or in English, and they were sent to Parliament the night before through Google Translate. And Google Translate was much worse than it is today. He says it was impossible to even read them, But of course, nobody read them, because those who voted against anyway. And those who voted in favor, the only way they could vote in favor is by not knowing what they were voting for. So, and then immediately after that, and 2 months later, he stages an election. And he wins it. Because the alternative was the right that was enthusiastic about the surrender. I mean, he was not enthusiastic about the surrender. So people had to choose between somebody who was surrendering unenthusiastically and the bastards from the right who were very gung-ho that we had surrendered. So, and so they voted for him, on the basis of the lesser of two evils logic.
In very difficult times, I have to remind our viewers that in 1978, 1979, 1980, 1981, the United States and Britain had branded Nelson Mandela a terrorist. Those of us who were supporting the ANC and Nelson Mandela were being denounced, very much like today. We were being denounced as terrorist enablers and apologists for terrorism. And the campaign to boycott, divest, and sanction the white supremacists of the South African Pretoria regime was a very difficult one. In the end, it worked. It worked when British Petroleum, when various companies started withdrawing, and so on. And people say to me today that, that means that our struggle to liberate Palestine and end apartheid in Israel-Palestine is doomed to win, to succeed. And I say to people, no, it's not. We must never make the mistake of thinking that just because we succeeded in the case of South Africa, we'll succeed in the case of Israel. We have to keep trying, and I want to remain hopeful that we will win. But we have to understand, to win, we need to understand and to appreciate that this is harder, a harder nut to crack. Israeli apartheid is much harder. And the point I've been making is that if you think back to the days of the apartheid regime in South Africa, what was the main driver of the economy in South Africa? It was the mines that utilized massive quantities of black labor, the factories, and the service sector, including having blacks to clean your home if you were a white supremacist, right? Essentially, for every one white supremacist, there had to be 20 blacks working. Okay? Therefore, the point I made was that the South African apartheid regime needed black workers. They tried to fence them inside the various Bantustans, the various reservations, as the Americans did with the natives. But they needed these to be close to the factories, close to the mines, close to their homes, and to have open doors so that they can go, maybe on a minibus to the near white settlement and work in the shops, work in the houses, work in the mines, and so on. Now, after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the massive emigration of Russian Jews and Kazakh Jews and Ukrainian Jews and so on to Israel, there was the importation, especially Jews coming from Arab countries as well. A new worker proletarian was imported. It was as if they imported a large Jewish proletarian.
Technology. Okay. My latest book, I call it techno-feudalism. I think that the markets have been sidelined by something like digital thieves. And of course, you are absolutely right. It's not that technology has taken over. Under capitalism, it wasn't the steam engine's fault that we had capitalism. The Luddites were not smashing machines because they hated the machines, because their machines were taking over. The Luddites, who, by the way, are probably the most misunderstood agents in political history, they were simply protesting the loss of their livelihood. And they were protesting the distribution of income produced by the machines and labor. And they were saying, quite naturally, well, if these machines can make us all richer, we want some of those riches. So similarly, my thesis, my hypothesis in the recent book, Techno-Feudalism, is that the reinforcement learning AI-driven algorithms, which live inside our phones, on our laptops, in this networked capital, which I call cloud capital, because it's supposed to be uploaded on the cloud. It's not a cloud, of course. It's huge server farms that look like normal factories in the United States, in China, in Europe, everywhere, connected with material optic fiber cables and cell towers. It's all capital, right? But I call it cloud capital to distinguish it from steam engines, railways, electricity grids, even very modern industrial robots, because all these, the standard forms of capital, whether it is a fishing rod or a very advanced industrial robot, they are produced means of production. Machines were produced to produce something else. But the algorithmic capital, which I call cloud capital, is a produced means of behavioral modification. It doesn't produce anything. It simply is an automated system for modifying human behavior. So it does all sorts of things that machines could never do. I mean, until recently, you needed a good advertiser in order to create an advertisement that persuades people to buy McDonald's, to buy Coca-Cola, to buy Mercedes-Benzes, whatever. So you had the creative mind of a good advertiser. I use Don Draper from Mad Men as an example, right? Who is, a service provider he provides the service to the conglomerate so that the conglomerate can sell more stuff to you and me. Okay? But cloud capital today, this algorithmic capital, which is inside Amazon.com, inside Google, inside Facebook, inside TikTok, and a myriad of other digital platforms, or cloud thieves as I call them. What this machine does, cloud capital, is it arrests your attention like television used to. It inputs into your mind desires that you didn't have, like advertisers used to. But it does that through an infinite two-way regress. Advertisement used to be a one-way street. You watched something on television, it went into your mind, and you wanted a McDonald's, and you went to the McDonald's, you ate it. But that was it. It was one way. Now, with Alexa, with Siri, with all of the devices, it is an infinite regress, because you train it to train you, to train it, to train you, to train it ad infinitum, to know you so that it gives you suggestions that inspire you to buy stuff that you would not have thought of buying. And then it sells it to you directly, bypassing every single market. And does so by charging the owner of that cloud capital, who owns the produced means of behavioral modification. He has the capacity to do two things at once: to charge the capitalist who sells you the binoculars or the electric bicycle or the book that you buy from Amazon.com, to charge them 40%. That's a rent. I call it the cloud rent. That's why I'm talking about techno-feudalism, not techno-capitalism. Okay. And at the same time, when you like something, when you post a review on Amazon, when you upload a video on Instagram or TikTok, you are replenishing with your free labor. I call that cloud surf labor. You are replenishing their capital stock, their cloud capital. So you're right. It's not a technology that's taking over. It's a new ruling class that owns cloud capital, which is a mutation of capital, which has killed capitalism. That's my thesis.
Condemned our soul to the hottest fires of hell. To make it a not too dramatic point. We are despicable. We Europeans are despicable now. And I think my country is a good example, because Greece was an outlier in Europe, in the sense that even right-wing governments were refusing to recognize Israel up until the 1990s. I grew up in a Greece which was constantly in the hands of the right wing, sometimes the extreme fascistic right wing. And yet even those right-wing governments were refusing to recognize Israel until there is a Palestinian state. So it was only in the early 1990s that Greece officially recognized. So that also, since we also have the war in Lebanon as we speak, in 1982, when Israel invaded Lebanon, very much as it is doing today, back then to eradicate the PLO, today to eradicate Hezbollah, the Greek prime minister at the time was a social democrat, socialist, Andreas Papandreou. He sent the Greek Navy to Beirut to evacuate the Palestinian leadership. The Greek Navy, a European country's navy, went to Beirut to evacuate the Palestinians and save them and brought them to Greece. And Arafat came to Greece, and there was, 500,000 people in the street welcoming. Where is Greece now? The day after I resigned in 2015 from the government, I was a Minister of Finance until the night of the 5th of July 2015, when my Prime Minister essentially surrendered to the International Monetary Fund, to the European Central Bank, to the powers that be, the West. And I resigned that night. Why am I mentioning that? Because within hours of my resignation, the Greek Prime Minister dispatched the Foreign Minister to Tel Aviv to embrace Netanyahu and start a big love affair between Greece and Israel. And effectively, Greece became Israel's lackey in the Eastern Mediterranean. As we speak, our agricultural land, many parts of our cities are being purchased by Israeli capital. The Israeli Air Force is using Greek airspace in order to train, because they don't have enough of broad enough, wide enough airspace in Israel to do it. The Greek government is completely complicit in the genocide of the Palestinians. I'm mentioning that because this is the Greek outlier from one extreme, the right way of respecting the Palestinians' aspirations for self-determination, we've swung to the other side. The pendulum has gone to the other side. So this is just one example, but allow me to make a more general point. People ask me, what are the Israelis doing? What do they think they will do? The answer is they think that they will get away with the kind of crimes that the Europeans got away with. Because when the Europeans went to India, when they went to South Africa, when they went to, in India, they didn't go as settlers so much, more as colonialists, but in South Africa, they went as colonists, as settlers. Similarly, in Kenya. Similarly, of course, in Australia. And Australia is a brilliant example because they legalized the genocide the moment they arrived in Australia. They declared the land to be terra nullius, an empty land, a land without a people, for a people without a land. And well, that's the Zionist notion. So, how did the United States come to be? Through genocide of the natives, through slavery and genocide. Now, in that sense, Israel is simply trying to replicate in the land of Palestine that which the British, the Germans, the Dutch, the French did in their empire. So it's not a great surprise, really, that European regimes and American regimes support Israel. Israel is simply trying to copy them. One would have thought, and this is a great disappointment of a European like me, that we Europeans, at least, managed to be self-critical, sometime in the 1960s and 1970s, with decolonization, to become critical of colonialism, critical of imperialism, and essentially to do our mea culpa, to admit that we were part of a brutalizing empire project, and that we've learned our lessons, but it seems that we have not learned our lessons, because when Germany today, hiding behind the fight against anti-Semitism, which is a fight that is very dear to my heart. We must all fight anti-Semitism. But the German government, the German political regime is hiding behind the fight against anti-Semitism in order to legitimize and support every war crime that Israel chooses to commit against the Palestinians. As if, two genocides make one right.
It's why I'm involved in politics, because it gives me joy. I wake up in the morning and I look forward to the day. I know that I'm going to be defeated politically. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
I have no belief, zero belief that our movement is going to win. I know that if you're on the left, you get a chance once every 50 years. We got that chance in 2015. We lost. But so what? I know I'm going to die. That doesn't mean I'm not going to have a good day today. Similarly, to be involved in politics for me, in activism, not politics as a career, but as an activist, is a path to genuine eudaimonia, to genuine happiness, to genuine satisfaction. But there's one proviso, however, because let's face it, the Nazis also had a sense of belonging and a lot of solidarity amongst themselves, right? Some of them have been, remarkably hideous in the way that they stuck up for one another. And here, the fascists in Greece, I see them. They are more solidaristic to one another than the leftists are, between you and me. But what is the difference? The difference is that they see they are tribal. They see their group as an extension of their own DNA, of their own very, very narrow family. The trick for being joyous through communal action and common action and collective action is to see the whole of humanity as one magma to which you belong, and to be able to enjoy